Alright guys, welcome on to Formula 1 news. It's race week in Montreal, and if Max Verstappen gets any penalty points this weekend or the next, he will have to take a race ban from Red Bull this season. The plan of Christian Horner's team, if this was to become an eventuality, has gained a massive boost today, with their targeted driver potentially down in Formula 2 right now, getting the super license exemption that they were looking for to potentially make it a reality if Verstappen does get a race ban, to completely switch up their lineup. This could be a big deal as well in terms of where Liam Lawson currently lies. Very much into your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always, I greatly appreciate it. Apologies for the late video, but it's because I've just got off a flight to Montreal, so I'm here this weekend. I'm still not 100% sure exactly what the plan is, but sometimes in life you can just do things, and obviously my intention is to attend the Grand Prix. I'm not exactly sure how or with who or like exactly what. We're working on it, let's say. We're working on it for a little while, but you know, sometimes you just gotta do stuff. So I thought, you know what, let me get out there to Montreal this weekend and hopefully have a great time. And it's an important weekend for the championship, but also for next year as well, because as I say, I'll try and do my best this weekend, keeping you guys updated with everything Formula 1, hopefully, you know, at times from the track and all this type of good stuff as well. But speaking of Canada, it's a big weekend because next year, the Canadian Grand Prix is going to clash with the Indy 500. This was the big talking point of this morning when the F1 calendar was revealed. Of course, this year, it clashes with Le Mans, and that's, of course, happening this weekend as well, but that's a 24-hour race. So a couple of hours for the Grand Prix maybe isn't the biggest deal, but for something like IndyCar, it is certainly a different story. So quick look at Le Mans for the weekend and some of the former Formula 1 drivers that are racing in Le Mans this year. But also, this is the calendar, if you guys haven't seen it yet. We heard rumours about this the other day, but it's now been officially locked in for 2026, and it begins in Australia on the 8th of March. Then we go to China, then we go to Japan. So it's a very similar calendar to this season with roughly 4 major alterations. So again, the season opener is in Melbourne, which I think is a good thing because of, you know, Ramadan and other factors. Mainly Ramadan, I believe they've moved Bahrain and Saudi Arabia to where they were in the calendar this year and where they're going to be next year as well. Then Miami, and then Canada follows Miami. So finally, with all F1's talk for years about net zero and 2030 or whatever they're talking about, you know, for years, this whole Canada race, even this year, it's very true as well. Last week, you know, last time out was, of course, Spain. Before that was Monaco. Come to Canada for a weekend and then straight back to Europe to go to what's going to be in Austria in a couple of weekends' time. Never made much sense. They've finally found something of a fix to that issue, and I know they've been working on this for some time, and I don't imagine that Canada are fully happy about it. They like their slot where it is this year on the 10th of June, roughly the 15th of June weekends, whereas next year it's going to be on the 22nd to 24th of May. So the Canadian Grand Prix is going to go earlier, and that, of course, is going to be Memorial Day weekends, which is when the Indy 500 is held. So that's the big story. I mean, I talked about it at the start of the video. This is actually my birthday as well, so May 24th, 2026 is going to be a good day for me. But, you know, maybe I can get to one of these two again. But yeah, Indy and Canada on the same day. And the important part about that, of course, is it's the same time. Because for Monaco, which usually clashes with the 500 on the same day, Monaco's in Europe, so that's nice and early morning if you're in America, and it's the other way around when Indy is in the evening if you're in Europe, whereas it's going to be the similar time zone. Like, the races are going to clash. And that is a big deal because the Indy 500 is, you know, a one of one in the motorsport world, and it's a race that motorsport fans really want to watch. I don't imagine that either party is going to be especially happy about this. Indy will have to compete with Formula 1, and the Canadian Grand Prix will have to compete for fans and eyeballs with the Indy 500 as well. It's not like they're that far from each other, really. Like, Montreal to Indianapolis is not that far of a flight. Like, people will choose to go to one over the other. And at the end of the day, the Canadian Grand Prix is one race in a 24-race calendar. The 500 is once a year. So it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out, really. But after that, we go to Monaco, and then the European stint begins. Monaco, Spain, notably, of course, this is Catalonia. So Barcelona stays for at least another year. Hopefully it stays longer, but it's going to stay for round 9 for at least another year. Then Austria, then Silverstone, then Belgium. Hungary, Netherlands is last year on the calendar there. We know that Zandvoort's going away. Then Italy, of course, Monza. Notably, of course, no Imola here, right? So Imola's gone entirely. It's only Monza now for the Italian Grand Prix there. And then Madrid. So they've put Madrid, probably sensibly, right at the end of the calendar for the European stint because it's going to take some prep work to get that circuit ready. There's going to be bureaucracy, there's going to be delays, and there are some questions whether they're even going to be able to have that Grand Prix ready to go for next year and the circuit homologated in time. We shall see. They're going to have to rush on it, I'm sure. But that's when they're targeting 2 Spanish races next season. Probably in years to come it will just be 1 in Madrid, unfortunately. But that's how it seems to be. Then Azerbaijan, then Singapore. So the calendar now, on the surface level, makes a lot more sense, right? We start over there in, Asia Pacific, really. We then do a couple of races in North America. We then do the big European stint, and then back to US, Mexico, Brazil for a triple header. And then after a weekend off, Vegas, Qatar, Abu Dhabi, another triple header to close out the season. So those are effectively the highlights here of the calendar. They've moved a couple of things around, I would say generally for the better, but we'll see how it goes, of course, in due course. And, of course, there's lots of discussion about what this means for Canada and Indy 500. And, it's been a big debate, of course, in recent days. Even Imola, of course, have commented on it and said that there's a lot of disappointment, a lot of bitterness from their side, but they say that this news does not represent the end of the story because, there is a feeling maybe that Imola, it could be a very long time until we see Imola back on the Formula 1 calendar again. But let's get into the drama for the upcoming weekends. Joe Soward was talking a bit in his notebook about Fred Vasseur and what the dynamic might continue to look like there at Ferrari, especially if their, let's say, difficult season continues and doesn't show many signs of turning around. The talk is that Elkan will at least stay patient until next year, but in 2027, then things are going to get challenging. This is what Soward actually had to say on the Christian Horner situation, because there were rumours that Ferrari were going after him. But the general feeling seems to be that that's not going to happen, at least not yet. But Fred Vasseur's future is beginning to be questioned, right? After the last couple of years, it seemed to be moving in such a great direction. And this season, of course, has been a very different story. And the idea of Horner to Ferrari has now gathered a bit more weight over the next, the last couple of weekends. And maybe that could continue into the future if the current Ferrari situation continues. So, look, it would have to be, well, as they describe here, cataclysmic change in the current level of competitiveness for them to somehow win the championship. But as he describes, the team is still popular, the road cars still sell better than ever, but Ferrari seems to be unable to fix the Formula 1 problem. And the thing is, it's not like a Fred Vasseur issue, right? Like, this comes from the top, this is cultural, and it doesn't seem to me right now like Fred Vasseur has really been able to resolve much of that. But let's talk Red Bull Racing. There was lots of drama when Max crashed into George. As we know, everyone's got their opinion on it. So do the stewards. The stewards, of course, at the time, verdicted, if that's even a word, but you know what I'm saying, they gave the verdict of a 10-second penalty to Max Verstappen. Many felt that was very lenient in the circumstances. We know what, Johnny Herbert had to say on various Max Verstappen things last year. He gave his thoughts to the media. And we know what happened then, right? Herbert would be commenting sometimes to the media on the decision that was made. The FIA felt like that was inappropriate for an active steward to be talking to the media. Herbert said, "To know what you're talking about, I can still be impartial on the weekends based on the rule book and then give my opinion to the media in the meantime." The FIA disagrees. They got rid of Johnny Herbert. But I will say that Derek Warwick, who is also a controversial steward because, the Honda dealership and all this, and obviously that relationship with Red Bull, he gives his perspective to the media. So I do wonder if anything will come of this. I'm not trying to snitch exactly, but you know what I'm saying, right? Because Johnny Herbert was criticised heavily for speaking to the media while serving as a steward, and Derek Warwick has actually quite a lot to say on it. Now, he does criticise Max, but he does defend Max more than maybe I expected. He says, "I think everyone has to realise that if you're a driver who is used to winning like Max, it is very difficult when things go against you in a race that on paper with 3 stops looks like you could win. We know he's a winner. Should he have done what he did at turn 5 with Russell? Absolutely not. Did he get a penalty for it? Yes. Vettel was once given a 10-second drive-through in Baku after an incident with Hamilton, but he deliberately drove into Lewis." So it's Warwick's opinion clearly that Verstappen did not deliberately drive into George. If you watch this video, it seems to me that although he dove in, he then did turn away from George, but momentum pushed him against George. It is absolutely wrong, and the FIA was right to give him a penalty. I think many people would say that he should have been given a suspension as an example to young karters, and they are probably right, which is, this confuses me a bit, because Warwick on one hand says, maybe he's talking about the example piece, but he's like, yeah, maybe he should have been given a suspension, but then in the next sentence says, actually, or in the next clause, but I like to think the penalty was perfect. I think the penalty was perfect, which, of course, a 10-second penalty and a race suspension is a rather different penalty. You have to look at each incident individually. It's not what I like to see. So anyway, he's given his perspective to the media. I still think that looking at that crash, like you can't really, I don't know. I find it difficult to argue that he just accidentally, he tried to turn in, and momentum pushed him against George. I don't really know if I buy that, but, interesting to hear people's perspectives on it. Anyway, the reality is he's 49 points adrift now after that incident of Oscar Piastri in the championship. It looks like, based on this beautiful image here, to be fair, that it is probably going to be a battle between the two McLarens for this year's title, with Max somewhere trailing further behind. But that story could change if this upcoming weekend in Canada is different. As we know, they're returning to the C4, C5, C6 compounds, the softest of all the compounds. The hard tyre here in Montreal is softer than the soft tyre that we saw in Spain. That's a big deal. The C6 tyre might not even get used. Who knows, right? I mean, it's going to get used, but some teams felt like the C5 was a superior qualifying tyre. The C6 seems maybe difficult to keep in the right temperature windows, but it doesn't feel like it's going to be that hot in Montreal this weekend. So maybe that will affect things slightly differently. And a track that, is not so damaging on the tyres as we have seen recently elsewhere, certainly a circuit like Barcelona, for example. So maybe an opportunity for Max, but of course also an opportunity for Max to get more points on his licence. And he's at 11 points now after what happened in Spain. One more point for any transgression in practice. And you can pick up points relatively easily, going into a pit box wrong or, doing a couple of things wrong. Most drivers have picked up a point or so in the last 12 months. So, it can happen. And of course, if you get into incidents, then it's going to happen more frequently, as Max sometimes does and has done certainly in the last 8 months or so, since kind of, let's say, the end of last season when things got a little bit hectic, let's say, in Mexico and even in Austin, but certainly Abu Dhabi as well. The clash with Piastri on the first corner, you guys may remember. So Red Bull are telling Max, look, 49 points behind, it ain't great. But if Max wins this upcoming weekend, starts to claw that gap back, maybe the McLarens crash into each other at some point, take each other out. It's not over yet. It's never going to be over yet. But it's obviously a big gap right now for Max. But still, if Max gets a race ban, you might as well chalk it up for the season, right? So he needs to avoid that at all costs. But if that does happen, what's Red Bull's contingency? What's their plan? What are they going to do? Well, we saw the other day, their plan seemed to be to get Lindblad a super license, because this guy's been killing it in Formula 2, 17 years old. He's 18 in a couple of months. There was all this talk about the super license exemption, and I will say there's drama on the Colton Herta side. You guys might remember Colton Herta, when IndyCar driver. He was trying to get the driver AlphaTauri as they were at the time, and Helmut Marko was interested in making it happen. He was old enough, but he did not have the necessary super license points, because you could argue the FIA does not maybe treat IndyCar as they should in terms of a competitive series. They looked for an exemption. That didn't happen. It wasn't granted. Now, there has been a recent rule added to the super license agreement that says, based on Antonelli and some discussions last year, but potentially revolving mainly around Lindblad, is that if a driver's under 18 and they show the right proficiency, then they can get the exemption. So maybe Colton Herta can't be too mad about it, but I'd still be pretty mad about it anyway. So the exemption has been granted. The FIA say the World Council found the driver has recently and consistently demonstrated outstanding ability and maturity in single-seater Formula car competition. So that's the argument. And that means that Lindblad is now able to drive Formula 1 cars before his 18th birthday, which is only a couple of months away. But this is still relevant, right? Potentially even for the championship, but certainly for the future of Red Bull racing. I don't know how relevant this will be unless Max gets a ban, but if he does, I think it will certainly be relevant. It also may be relevant for Lindblad doing some FP1 practice running. I think Silverstone would potentially be a good opportunity to put him in the car. That's something they can now think about doing and potentially will do. I'd be kind of surprised if they don't consider something anyway to that ends. But what happens if Max gets a race ban? We talked about this the other day, and of course now the exemption has been granted, so they have room to decide what they want to do. Of course, pretty funny that Peter Bayer, Racing Bull's CEO, says, please Red Bull, don't take HyDra away from us. We need him. We want to grow and develop him. And, you know, please don't take this talent away from us too soon, he says. So he's expecting it maybe to happen at some point, but certainly not hoping that it happens yet. And I think that would probably be wise. But then again, if for one race weekends, Lindblad, you know, Verstappen is out and Lindblad comes in, you know, they're not going to put Lindblad straight into the Red Bull. I mean, you know, if they're insane, then yeah, sure, maybe. But it wouldn't make much sense. You'd put him in the Racing Bulls and you'd promote one of the other guys. You could promote Lawson because at least you've seen him in the car at the start of the season, so you'd get some information from how the car has trended. But HyDra, you've not seen him yet in a Red Bull. I think that would probably be the thing to do. We'll see if Red Bull agree in due course, if it becomes a relevant factor. But, you know, Max has 2 races to avoid any more penalty points, which is, you know, I'd say there's a good 20%, 25% chance that Max ends up getting a race ban. And therefore, all of this stuff becomes very relevant indeed. So they've approved this. What does it mean as well for potentially in the next couple of months? Because, you know, let's say Liam Lawson continues to have a stinker. You know, they're probably never going to put him back in the Red Bull. That's the thing. And I think this was true really with Danny Rick, and also was very nearly true of Huke, that it felt like Red Bull had effectively decided, well, you're never getting the drive in the number 1 seat again, or number 2 seat, let's say, at the number 1 team. And if that's true, and if that's like what they decide, then what's the point keeping you around? It's like, that's the way that Red Bull think, and it might even be fair enough and justified. Like if Lawson, if they don't think they're ever getting in the seat again, they might say, you know what, Arvid, we'll just chuck you in mid-season, and now you're able to drive, why not, right? Send you in the car, get even more Grand Prix experience, and then hopefully for 2026, he's really up to speed. I think that Red Bull, though, may learn from their mistakes and elect not to do this. But yes, very much intrigued to your thoughts as ever in the comment section below. And just one final topic for you all. It was a big conversation point in Spain. At the end of the race, there was a car stricken, Antonelli's car, and the safety car lasted for about 6 laps, which is rather a long time. They faffed around a lot with, you know, letting the lapped cars catch up and then letting the lapped cars past and then letting them catch up again to the pack and all this stuff. And, you know, there's just been a bit of a debate as to whether the safety car needs to last that long, whether we can say, okay, the car's clear, let's just get rolling, whatever the situation really is going on the track. So there's a lot of debate on this. Most fans, at least, you know, a higher percentage of fans are suggesting that it's fine as it is, which I am kind of similarly to agree to be honest. I don't mind the little suspension of a safety car, as long as there's enough laps left at the end, right? Like, there was at least enough laps left at the end of Spain to give us a race. Had the safety car happen 7 laps from the ends, you know, you'd want at least 3 racing laps happening there, but that probably wouldn't have happened. So, you know, I know that safety is paramount, but there's probably many Formula 1 purists that say, look, you know, you can't just be such a nanny state, I think was the term that Joe Soward used. Motorsport is inherently dangerous to some degree, and, you know, maybe it's okay to not take forever to allow everyone to catch up and all the, you know, related drama. But very much intrigued to your thoughts on all of this stuff in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new. Take care, and I'll see you next time.